The kettle shrieks on the iron stove, while wind hammers the log walls of a lonely homestead outside the town of Little Crow, Montana territory. Inside, old Martha Kruger is tied to a chair with rough hemp rope wrists, rubbed raw gray hair hanging in damp ropes over her sunken cheeks. Her son Zachary stands over her knuckles, white around the handle of a black cast-iron kettle, steam boiling up into his face and turning his skin red and slick. "Say you burn that ledger," he growls, tipping the kettle until a thin line of scalding water hangs above her chest, the surface trembling with the violence of the boil. The front door slams open. Harsh sunlight cuts across the room like a blade. A Lakota warrior stands framed in the doorway, tall, lean, dressed in tan buckskin and a war bonnet of white eagle feathers tipped in black. His right arm is braced on the doorframe. His left hand extends fingers stabbing the air at Zachary. "Enough," Lakota says. His voice is low, but it stops the kettle in mid-tilt. In that frozen instant, memory flashes through his mind, winter cold biting his ribs, the taste of warm bread pressed into his trembling hands, Martha's fierce eyes as she faced down drunk ranch hands, with nothing but a shovel and raw courage. He owes this woman his life. He will not let her die today. Zachary jerks the kettle slips, and boiling water splashes across Martha's shoulder. She screams as steam blooms around her, and in that instant, the lies of a crooked banker and the honor of a Lakota family collide on the dirt floor of a settler's cabin in the year 1852. Lakota is a Lakota warrior in his 24th year, a former Army scout who now works between worlds hunting with his people along the White Willow River and taking hired tracking work from settlers when it does not damage Lakota interests. He is the nephew of Mahpe, a respected voice in the summer camps, and the son of a headman who died 3 winters ago from a fever no white medicine could touch. His father taught him English and the strange way whites mark ownership on paper, believing that understanding the enemy's tools would protect the people. Lakota remembers those lessons every time he crosses into settler territory. Years ago, half-starved and hunted by drunk ranch hands who claimed he stole a pig. Lakota stumbled into Martha Kruger's yard with a bullet graze along his ribs and no strength left to run. She gave him bread still warm from the oven, hid him in her root cellar beneath sacks of turnips, and sent the men away with a shovel in her hands and fury in her eyes. When they threatened to search, she told them to try and see what happened to the last man who touched her property without asking. They left. Lakota slept in that cellar for 2 nights, eating bread and smoked ham, listening to Martha's boots creak overhead. When he left, she pressed a small knife wrapped in cloth into his hand. "You owe me nothing," she said. "But if you see me in trouble, remember I saw you as a man, not a beast." He has never forgotten. Lately, rumors ride the wind across the Montana grasslands. Small immigrant farms are losing their land after misunderstandings, with Cornelius Pratt, the banker, in nearby Gunpowder Gulch. Homesteaders swear they never signed away water rights or grazing strips, yet stamped deeds say otherwise. Families pack wagons in tiers, heading east or west, anywhere but the land they bled to clear. Lakota grazing land along the river is being fenced with wooden rails and simple wire. The barriers backed by Pratt's loans and Sheriff Roaring Jack Harlan's badge. The fences cut off elk trails and keep the people from their ancestral hunting grounds. Every season the land shrinks, and every season more wooden posts appear with legal papers nailed to them. Dr. Nathaniel Price, the town's thin, tired physician with spectacles held together by copper wire, quietly warns Lakota during a visit to the Lakota camp to treat a child's fever. If anyone knows how Pratt twisted the ink, Nathaniel says, crouching beside the fire and keeping his voice below the wind, it is Martha Kruger. She kept his books for years after her husband Heinrich died. But there is something else Martha once told me. Heinrich's death was not natural. A fall from his horse, they said, but the horse came home without a scratch. If she talks now, she will be silenced like he was. The words settle in Odakota's chest like stones. Murder, not accident. A secret Martha has carried alone for years. He rides for the Kruger place the next morning. The homestead sits in a shallow valley 2 hours northwest of Little Crow, a cluster of log buildings surrounded by fields that struggle against the thin soil. There he meets Emma Kruger, Martha's widowed daughter-in-law, a capable frontier woman in her late 20s, with sunburned hands, a hard line to her jaw, and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. She works the fields behind a plow mule, shoots varmints from the fence posts with a rifle older than she is, and keeps her small son Peter fed on what the land provides: beans, cornmeal, rabbit stew, and the occasional chicken that stops laying. Emma trusts no one, least of all a banker or lawman, but she remembers the starving Lakota boy Martha once helped. When Odakota rides up to the gate and asks in careful English if he may water his horse, she studies him for a long moment, then nods toward the well. "Martha spoke of you," Emma says, leaning on the fence rail while he lowers the bucket. "She said you had good manners for someone raised in a teepee." "She had good aim for someone raised in a kitchen," Odakota replies, and the ghost of a smile crosses Emma's face. By the time he knocks on the cabin door with the excuse of delivering smoked venison as thanks for old kindness, Zachary is already inside with a boiling kettle and a list of threats. Zachary Kruger is Martha's youngest son, a man in his mid-30s with thinning hair and a perpetual scowl. He married a woman from St. Louis who left him after one brutal winter, taking their infant daughter and leaving only a note that said she would rather beg in the city than freeze with a man who loved land more than people. Since then, Zachary has worked for Pratt in small, ugly ways, delivering foreclosure notices, intimidating witnesses, ensuring that disputed boundary markers vanish before surveyors arrive. He believes Pratt will reward him with a share of the seized land. He believes his mother's silence is the only thing standing between him and prosperity. He is half right. The cabin smells of lye soap and fear when Odakota steps inside. Zachary has tied Martha to the chair in the center of the room, the same chair where Heinrich used to read the Bible on Sunday mornings. Her dress is torn at the shoulder, her face is pale. Emma stands in the corner, a revolver pointed at her from Zachary's left hand, while his right grips the kettle. Peter, a boy of 6 with his mother's eyes and his dead father's stubborn chin, crouches behind the table, silent and trembling. "Say you burned that ledger," Zachary repeats, voice rising. "Say it, Ma, and this ends." Martha lifts her head. Her voice is hoarse but steady. "I will not lie for you again, boy." That is when Odakota steps through the door and says the single word that changes everything. Odakota crosses the room in 3 long strides. He rips the kettle from Zachary's grip with his left hand and flings it aside. Scalding water explodes across the dirt floor instead of Martha's chest hissing and steaming in the cold air. The old woman gasps, burned on one shoulder, but alive the skin already turning red beneath the torn fabric. Emma, who had been pinned in the corner by Zachary's pistol, dives for the chair, cutting her mother-in-law's ropes with the belt knife she keeps sheathed at her hip. The blade is small but sharp, honed on a whetstone every evening after Peter goes to sleep. Ma holds still. She mutters, hands moving fast, voice shaking but steady. The hemp parts with short sawing strokes. Zachary lunges, swinging a fist at Odakota's jaw. Odakota meets him with his forearm, a bone-jarring block that sends Zachary stumbling backward into the wall, hard enough to rattle the framed daguerreotype of Heinrich Kruger in his Sunday coat. Zachary snarls, drags a Colt revolver from his waistband, and jams the barrel toward Odakota's ribs. Emma raises the double-barrel shotgun from beside the stove, the weapon she uses to chase foxes from the henhouse. The barrel's now pointed dead center at her brother-in-law's spine. "Drop it, Zach," she says. Her voice is flat, drained of kinship. I have had this gun longer than you have had your temper, and I know which end to point. For a few seconds, the room locks in a tableau of violence barely restrained. Odakota's hand clamped on Zachary's wrist. Zachary's pistol half-lifted, Emma's finger tense on the trigger child. Peter whimpering behind the overturned table, Martha gasping and clutching her burned shoulder. Zachary finally lets the gun fall to the dirt floor with a soft thud. You are choosing a savage over your own blood. He spits at Emma, his face twisted with rage and something close to desperation. Pratt will see you all on the road with nothing but dust and memories. You think you can fight him. He owns the sheriff. He owns the land office. He owns this whole valley. He shoves past Odakota, shoulders slamming into the doorframe, and storms outside into the midday sun. The door slams behind him, hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Through the window, they watch him mount his horse, a rangy bay gelding, and spur it into a hard gallop toward the southeast, toward Gunpowder Gulch, and the men who pay his wages. Martha clutches Odakota's sleeve with one trembling hand, her fingers cold despite the heat still radiating from the stove. The ledger. She wheezes each word in effort. Under the floorboard by the bed. Every lie Pratt made me write, every name I copied when my hand shook so hard I could barely hold the pen. But there is more evidence about Heinrich. Pratt killed him, I know it now. He will kill us all to keep it quiet. The words hang in the air like smoke, like murder, not just fraud. The stakes have just doubled. Odakota and Emma pry up the floorboard beside Martha's narrow bed, the wood creaking and splintering under the iron pry bar Emma fetches from the tool shed. Beneath the board, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, lies a ledger bound in cracked leather. Its edges are stained brown from years of handling the pages thick with ink. Emma unwraps it carefully, as if it might explode, and flips through the first few entries. Names, dates, amounts, signatures all written in Martha's careful hand, the script neat and slanted to the right. Some entries are marked with small dots in the margin, almost invisible, unless you know to look. Those are the lies, Martha says from the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. Everyone I wrote when Pratt stood over my shoulder and told me what to copy. Tucked into the back pages is a torn piece of paper yellowed with age. On it, in Martha's shaking hand, are notes about Heinrich's death and the date, the location where the horse returned, a description of bruises on Heinrich's neck that the undertaker dismissed as rope burn from a harness. I wrote this the day we buried him, Martha whispers. I was too afraid to speak then. I am not anymore. Barely have they hidden the ledger in a grain sack beneath a layer of cornmeal when the sound of hoofbeats rises from the road. Emma moves to the window, rifle in hand, and curses under her breath. Harlan, she says. Sheriff Roaring Jack Harlan appears on the rise with 2 deputies flanking him, dust plumes rising behind their horses. Harlan is a broad man in his 50s, with a gray beard stained yellow from tobacco and a tin star pinned to a vest that strains across his belly. He earned his nickname years ago by shouting down a mob that wanted to hang a horse thief without trial. But that was before Pratt's money paved half the streets in Gunpowder Gulch and paid for the new courthouse roof. Now Harlan wants quiet more than truth, and he knows which side of the bread holds the butter. Zachary stands beside the sheriff arm in a sling. He does not need one eye swelling shut from where Odakota's forearm caught him. He is shouting before his horse even stops, words tumbling over each other. That drunk Indian broke in and attacked my mother. He tried to kill her. Emma's gone mad and sided with him. You have to arrest them both before someone else gets hurt. Harlan raises one hand for silence and dismounts with a grunt. He walks to the cabin door, boot heels loud on the packed earth, and knocks twice with the butt of his revolver. Emma Kruger, he calls. Come out and talk. No one needs to get shot today. Emma opens the door a crack. "Zach is a liar," she says flatly. "He was the one with the kettle. He burned Martha." Lakota stopped him. Harlan glances at Zachary, then back at Emma. His face is unreadable. "Pratt sent word that he is concerned about Martha's safety," he says. "Asked me to bring her into town where she can be looked after proper. Says she has been confused lately, saying things that do not make sense. He thinks she might hurt herself." "She is not confused," Emma snaps. "She is a witness to fraud and to murder." Harlan's eyes narrow. "That is a serious accusation, ma'am. Not for you to decide. Now I can do this easy or hard, but either way, Martha comes with me. And the Indian too for questioning." Martha pushes past Emma, her burned shoulder bandaged with torn linen, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She grips Emma's arm with surprising strength and whispers loud enough for Lakota to hear from across the room. "If I leave here with them, you will bury an empty box within the week. They will call it an accident or say my heart gave out, and you will never see that ledger in a courtroom." Emma has a choice. Give up the man who just saved her mother and trust a crooked system that has already stolen her neighbor's land, or run. Her eyes flick from the sheriff's badge to Zachary's smug, swollen face, to Lakota's calm, waiting expression. He has not moved, has not drawn a weapon, but his body is coiled like a spring ready. She moves. In one smooth motion, Emma tosses a smoke-blackened wool blanket onto the lantern hanging from the ceiling beam. The oil catches the wick flares, and thick gray smoke billows through the room, filling the air with choking haze and the stench of burning wool. Out the back, Lakota barks his voice, cutting through the confusion. He scoops Peter under his good arm, and the boy, too shocked to scream, and kicks open the rear door into the lean-to where the chickens roost. Emma grabs Martha and half drags, half carries her into the corral, where the plow mule and 2 draft horses stamp and snort in alarm. Bullets crack through the cabin walls as Harlan's men fire blindly, not wanting to enter the smoke, but unwilling to let them escape. Wood splinters, glass shatters. Lakota boosts Martha into the small farm wagon, hitched to the draft team. Emma tosses Peter in beside her, and then vaults into the driver's seat. She snaps the reins with a sharp crack, and the team lunges forward, the wagon jolting through the open gate and out onto the open prairie. Lakota mounts his paint horse in one fluid motion, draws his rifle from its saddle scabbard, and fires 3 high warning shots toward the cabin, not to kill, but to keep the deputies' heads down and their aim wild. The tall grass closes around them as they race northwest toward the White Willow River and the Lakota summer camps. Behind them, smoke pours from the cabin windows. Zachary screams orders, but Harlan holds his men back, unwilling to chase blindly into Lakota territory without more guns and better light. He knows the stories of what happens to white men who ride careless through those hills. Now the sheriff Zachary and soon Cornelius Pratt know they are running with something far more valuable than a frightened old woman. They are running with proof of murder. They drive hard toward the White Willow River, the wagon bouncing over uneven ground, the team snorting and straining in the harness. Dust coats their teeth and fills their lungs. Martha's burned shoulder throbs with every jolt. Peter cries until exhaustion drags him to sleep in the wagon bed. Emma drives with her jaw-clenched eyes fixed on the horizon, while Lakota rides beside the wagon, scanning the ridgelines for pursuit. They reach the Lakota camp at mid-morning the next day, following the river upstream through a canyon where willows grow thick along the banks. The camp is a cluster of teepees arranged in a wide circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in a roped enclosure. Children chase each other between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women look up from their work tanning hides, grinding corn, mending moccasins, and their laughter dies when they see the wagon. Lakota's Uncle Mape is a man in his 50s with long gray braids wrapped in red cloth and a face carved by weather and wisdom. He steps out of his teepee, wearing a buckskin shirt decorated with porcupine quills, and stands with his arms crossed, waiting. Lakota dismounts and speaks in Lakota the words fast and urgent. Mape listens without interrupting his gaze, moving from Lakota to the wagon, where Martha sits pale and trembling to Emma, with her rifle across her knees, to Peter staring wide-eyed at the unfamiliar world around him. After a long silence, Mape nods once. "Bring them to the council fire," he says in English, his accent thick but clear. "We will hear the old woman's words. If they are true, she and her family may stay until the danger passes. If they are lies, they leave before the sun sets." That night, by the light of a fire built in the center of the camp, Martha speaks. Her voice is weak at first, but it grows stronger as she describes how Cornelius Pratt hired her to keep his books after Heinrich died and the farm struggled. She needed the money. He needed someone who could write a fine hand and keep quiet. At first, the work was honest, recording loans, payments, interest. Then Pratt began asking her to correct entries, to change dates, to copy signatures from old documents so new deeds would match the old ones. And then, my husband died, Martha says, her voice breaking. Heinrich rode out to check the fence line and came home draped over his horse neck, twisted face purple. They said the horse threw him, but Heinrich grew up on horseback. He could ride a Missouri mule drunk in a thunderstorm. And the horse not a scratch on him, not even breathing hard. I found bruises on Heinrich's neck, shaped like fingers. The undertaker told me to hush, said I was seeing things in my grief. She pulls out the torn paper from the ledger, her hands shaking. 2 weeks after Heinrich died, Pratt came to me with new papers. Said Heinrich had signed over water rights to White Willow Spring as collateral for a loan I never knew existed. I knew then Pratt killed him to take the land, and I kept silent because I was afraid for my children. The camp falls silent. Mape and the other elders listen without speaking. When Martha finishes, Mape asks to see the ledger. Emma brings it from the wagon, unwrapping the oilcloth with careful hands. Lakota translates as Mape flips through the pages, pausing at entries marked with Martha's secret dots. One entry catches his eye, a transfer of grazing rights along a 2-mile stretch of riverbank, signed by a Lakota headman named Tasunke Witko, Crazy Horse's uncle dead for 3 years. Mape's jaw tightens. "This mark is not his," Mape says, tapping the page. Tasunke Witko signed with a circle and 3 lines. "This is a white man's scratch." After a tense council, the elders agree to shelter the fugitives for 3 nights in exchange for the truth in that ledger. Emma ties up the horses, helps gut an antelope brought in by hunters, fetches water from the river, and keeps Peter close, but not hidden. The boy is fascinated by everything, the teepees, the dogs, the older children who stare at him with curiosity and suspicion. That night, and the next, Emma and Lakota stand guard together at the edge of camp, looking down toward the dark river, where any campfire could signal an enemy. Both know how to handle a rifle. They divide the watch without a word. When coyotes yip from the hills, Peter stirs in the lodge, and Emma half turns. Lakota shifts a step closer so they can both see the camp and the dark prairie beyond it, from one spot, shoulders nearly touching breath, forming twin plumes in the cold night air. "Thank you," Emma says quietly, breaking the silence. "For what you did back there. For my family. Your mother-in-law saved my life once." Lakota replies, eyes still scanning the darkness. "I do not forget debts." "Is that all this is, a debt?" He glances at her, and for a moment the mask of calm he wears slips. "No," he says simply. "Not anymore." They say nothing else, but the silence between them is no longer empty. Meanwhile, back in Gunpowder Gulch, Cornelius Pratt sits in his office above the bank, a room lined with ledgers and maps marked with red ink. He is a heavy man, with pale skin, thinning hair, slicked back with pomade, and eyes that calculate profit in every glance. When Zachary arrives with news of the escape, Pratt does not shout. He simply opens a drawer, counts out $100 in gold coins, and slides them across the desk to three hard-faced men who have been waiting in the corner. "Bring me that ledger," Pratt says. "Kill the old woman. The rest are expendable." The men leave without a word. On the third night, when the camp settles after a brief cold rainstorm that turns the ground to mud and fills the air with the scent of wet sage, Martha calls Lakota and Emma into the guest teepee. Her fever has eased. The pain has sharpened her memory instead of clouding it. Peter sleeps soundly on a pile of furs in the corner, worn out from a day of running with the Lakota children. Martha lights a small oil lamp, the flame guttering in the draft. And together, they open the ledger. By lamplight, she runs a trembling finger down columns of names and acreages, explaining each entry in a voice that grows steadier with each page. "This was not just debt," she says. Pratt used the ink like a noose. Halfway through, Lakota freezes. His finger hovers over a line written in Martha's careful script. "White Willow Spring Common Watering Agreement. Signed this day by Heinrich Kruger homesteader and Matonajin Standing Bear headman of the White Willow Band." The entry lists 2 witnesses and notes that both families agree to share permanent use of the spring, so long as water flows and grass grows. Martha explains, her voice breaking slightly. "I wrote that page in the spring of '48, when your father and my husband met, to settle a dispute over a stray cow. They decided that fighting over one animal was foolish when the land was big enough to share. They shook hands by the spring and asked me to write it down so their children would remember. Heinrich signed his name. Your father pressed his thumb in red clay and marked it beside his name. It was the finest thing I ever wrote." Lakota says nothing. He stares at the page, at his father's mark, at the words that promised peace. Then Martha turns the page. A second entry, written years later in the same hand, but with a heavier stroke, transfers exclusive rights to White Willow Spring to the Bank of Gunpowder Gulch as collateral for a loan taken by Heinrich Kruger. The date is 3 months after Heinrich's death. The signature at the bottom is supposed to be Heinrich's, but the loops are wrong, the flourish too neat, the downstroke too confident. Emma recognizes it immediately. She watched her father-in-law sign her marriage contract to his eldest son. Heinrich's hand shook from old age and hard work, and his signature was a cramped, uncertain scrawl. This signature is smooth practiced forged. Pratt dictated it. Martha whispers. He gave me one of Heinrich's old letters and told me to copy the signature exactly. He said it was just a formality, that the loan was legitimate. I believed him because I was afraid not to. Because I suspected what he had done to Heinrich, and I knew I could be next. Then Martha flips to the very last page of the ledger, hidden beneath the binding. There, in shaking script, is a confession she wrote years ago, but never had the courage to share. On the night before Heinrich died, I heard him arguing with Cornelius Pratt in the barn. Heinrich accused Pratt of altering loan documents. Pratt said if Heinrich spoke to the territorial governor, accidents could happen to anyone. The next day, Heinrich was dead. I believe Pratt sent men to kill him and make it look like a fall. I have lived with this fear for 6 years. If I die, suddenly know that Pratt is responsible. The twist lands like a hammer blow. Not just fraud, not just a forged signature murder. Premeditated cold designed to seize land and silence a witness. Emma's father-in-law was killed because he discovered Pratt's scheme. Martha has lived with that knowledge for 6 years, too terrified to speak, carrying the guilt and the secret like a stone in her chest. Emma closes the book carefully, her hands shaking. If we bring this into court, she says slowly, we are not just accusing Pratt of fraud. We are accusing him of murder. He will do anything to stop us. Lakota lifts his eyes from the page. His face is unreadable, but his voice is steady. Your father-in-law died defending his honor and the promise he made to my father. We finish what he started. Together. Martha reaches out and grips both their hands, her fingers cold and bony. If you take this to a judge, she says, I will stand in front of the whole territory and say, I forged that signature on Pratt's orders, and I will name him as Heinrich's killer. And if they hang me for it, at least I will die telling the truth. From that point forward, the stakes are not simply life and death. They are about justice for a murdered man, about repairing a broken promise between two families and two peoples, about proving that honor can survive betrayal if someone is willing to stand up and name the lie. At dawn, they break camp. Mape lends 2 young warriors as escort to the edge of Lakota land, but he cannot risk more. Army patrols watch every movement of the people, looking for excuses to call a gathering hostile and send in troops. The fugitives follow a narrow ravine that cuts southeast toward a shallow ford on the White Willow River. If they can cross there, they will reach the main trail into Little Crow, and from there, it is another day's hard ride to Gunpowder Gulch, where the circuit judge is due to arrive in 4 days to hear land disputes. The ravine is steep-sided, choked with juniper and loose rock. The wagon creaks and groans as the team picks its way down the slope. Emma drives her knuckles white on the reins. Martha sits beside her, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside a canvas satchel slung across her body. Peter rides behind them with one of the Lakota warriors, a young man named Hanska, who carries a rifle and keeps his eyes on the ridgeline. Lakota and the second warrior, Tatanka, ride ahead scouting the trail. They are halfway down the ravine when the ambush comes. The first shot cracks from the rocks above a sharp, flat report that echoes off the stone walls. Hanska jerks backward, crimson spreading across his chest, and tumbles from his horse. The animal screams and bolts, nearly trampling Peter. The second shot takes Tatanka's horse in the neck. The animal goes down, thrashing, pinning Tatanka's leg beneath its body. Zachary and 4 of Pratt's hired men appear on the ridge above them, rifles aimed down into the ravine. The range is long, but they have the high ground and plenty of ammunition. Zachary's face is twisted with rage and something close to madness. Give up the ledger and the old woman. Zachary shouts, his voice bouncing off the rocks. The rest of you can ride out. I will tell Pratt you fought hard. Emma swings her shotgun up and fires both barrels at the ridgeline. The shot is too scattered to do damage at that range, but it makes the men duck and buys a few seconds. Lakota takes a bullet through the upper arm and the impact spinning him half around in the saddle. He drops his rifle, but manages to grab the reins before his paint horse throws him. Pain explodes through his shoulder, hot and immediate, and he feels the warm trickle of his own life seeping down his sleeve. Can you use that arm? Emma snaps, already reloading the shotgun with shaking hands. Enough to make them cautious. Lakota grits out, retrieving his rifle with his good hand and jamming the butt against his ribs to steady it. He fires once, twice, forcing the gunmen to keep their heads down. Emma hauls on the reins, turning the wagon team uphill at a steep angle. The horses lunge hooves, scrabbling for purchase on the loose rock. The wagon tilts dangerously, one wheel lifting off the ground, but it holds. Martha clings to the seatback, her face gray. Peter screams his mother's name, but Emma does not stop. She drives the team up the ravine wall, following a narrow game trail that Lakota spotted from below, whipping the horses when they falter. Behind them, Tatanka drags himself free from his dead horse and returns fire with his revolver, forcing the gunmen to split their attention. One of Pratt's men stands to get a better shot and takes a bullet in the shoulder from Tatanka's gun. He falls backward, cursing. Another man moves to flank them, but Lakota, despite the crimson soaking his sleeve, puts a round close enough to his head that the man dives behind a boulder and stays there. They break out onto open prairie, the wagon wheels bouncing over rocks and sagebrush. A rock kicked up by the rear wheel ricochets off the axle with a sharp crack splintering the wood, but not breaking it. Not yet. They leave 2 dead men and 1 mortally wounded Lakota warrior behind, and Tatanka limping after them on foot, his leg broken, but his rifle still firing to cover their escape. Hanska dies in the ravine, his eyes open to the sky, another name added to the cost of Pratt's greed. That night, they shelter in the ruins of an old way station, a stone building with half a roof and walls riddled with bullet holes from some forgotten fight. The place smells of charcoal and old violence. Emma binds Odakota's arm with strips torn from her petticoat, pressing cloth hard against the wound, while he clenches his teeth and stares at the far wall. The bullet went clean through the muscle, missing the bone, but leaving a ragged hole that will not stop seeping. "You should have left us when the sheriff came," Emma says, her voice flat from exhaustion and something darker, fear perhaps, or the beginning of something she cannot name. "I gave your mother's bread back when I pulled you from that cabin." Odakota answers his breath, coming in short gasps. "The rest I do for my father and for that spring. If Pratt takes the water, my people lose more than land. We lose the memory of a promise kept." Emma ties off the bandage and sits back on her heels, studying his face in the dim light of the small fire they dared to build behind the broken wall. "You are a fool," she says, but there is no anger in it, only a kind of weary respect. "So are you," he replies. "You could have given Zachary the ledger and walked away. Pratt would have let you keep the farm if you stayed quiet. I do not want a farm built on lies and my father-in-law's grave," Emma says. She stands, picks up her rifle, and moves to the window to watch the darkness. Outside, coyotes circle the dead Lakota horse they had to leave behind. In the deeper darkness beyond the firelight, Zachary's men move like shadows, cutting off their path to Little Crow. Odakota joins her at the window, favoring his wounded arm. They stand in silence, 2 people who have run out of words that are not about survival, watching the night for movement. Once Emma's hand brushes his on the windowsill, a brief accidental touch that neither of them acknowledges. But neither of them pulls away. They reach Martha's homestead again by midday, hoping to grab fresh horses from the barn and cut south along the river to avoid Zachary's men. Instead, smoke rises from the direction of the farm before they even crest the last ridge. Zachary's riders already ring the place, 6 men on horseback, rifles out waiting. One of them has set the barn on fire, flames licking up the sides of the old structure, the dry wood catching fast. It is a message and a trap: come for your horses and die, or run on foot and die slower. Odakota, Emma, Martha, and Peter barely beat the flames to the cabin. They drag the wagon behind the building, unhitch the exhausted team, and slap the horses away toward the river where they might survive. Emma and Odakota haul a small keg of water and 2 crates of ammunition inside. The air already smells of smoke and coming violence. For the next 3 hours, the cabin becomes a fortress under siege. Bullets punch through the chinks between logs, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The windows shatters one by one. Odakota fires from the east window in controlled bursts, his wounded arm shaking but functional, each shot carefully placed to make the attackers think twice about charging. Emma takes the west window, calling out ranges and targets in a flat, steady voice. 200 yards behind the water trough, she says. Moving left. I see him, Odakota replies, tracking the target. He fires. The man drops. One on the roof of the chicken coop, Emma calls. Reloading. Cover me, Odakota says, shifting position. Emma fires twice, forcing the man to duck while Odakota moves to a better angle and takes the shot. Another man falls. When Odakota's arm trembles too hard to hold the rifle steady, Emma wordlessly hands him the shorter carbine and takes the heavier Springfield herself, bracing the barrel on the windowsill and firing with grim precision. Peter crouches behind the overturned table with Martha, both of them pressed flat against the dirt floor. The boy is silent now, too frightened to cry, his small hands gripping his grandmother's dress. Martha whispers to him old prayers and nonsense words, anything to keep him calm. Once a bullet rips through the window frame beside Emma's head and grazes her cheek, a hot line of pain that draws a thin red line. Lakota grabs her shoulder and yanks her down behind the upturned table just as a second shot shatters the water crock where her head had been a heartbeat before. They land hard bodies pressed together in the narrow strip of floor between table and wall. Breath roaring in their ears, hearts pounding against ribs. For a brief suspended heartbeat, there is nothing in the world but shared breath, the wild thump of his chest against hers, and Peter's small hand gripping both their sleeves at once, anchoring them to the present. Lakota's face is inches from hers, close enough that she can see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough that she can feel the heat radiating from his skin despite the cold terror coiling in her gut. "I cannot lose you." He says the words escaping before he can stop them. "Not now." Emma stares at him, something unspoken passing between them in that moment. Not a declaration, not a promise, but an acknowledgement that whatever this is, it matters. It matters more than she expected. Then the moment breaks. Lakota rolls away, shoving spare cartridges toward her. "Reload," he says, his voice rough. "We hold until someone in Little Crow grows a spine, or we run out of ammunition, whichever comes first." Emma presses her hand to her bleeding cheek, then wipes the crimson on her skirt and goes back to the window. She does not waste words on fear. Help arrives in the form of Sheriff Harlan and a mixed posse townsfolk, a few ranchers, Dr. Nathaniel with his black bag bouncing on his saddle, and Honest Abe carrying a rifle that looks older than the territory. They fire warning shots into the air, the sound loud enough to be heard over the crackle of flames consuming the barn. The sight of so many witnesses makes Zachary's men hesitate. No one wants to shoot a woman and child in front of half the county, not when there are this many eyes to remember and this many mouths to testify. Using the distraction, Lakota and Emma shove the ledger into Martha's hands, bundle Peter into the salvaged wagon, hitched to 2 draft horses they managed to steal from the burning barn before the flames took hold and crashed through the back fence at a full gallop. Smoke rolls over the yard, thick and black, giving them precious seconds of cover. They race toward the shallow river crossing that leads directly to the road into Gunpowder Gulch. Wheels bouncing over rocks and ruts, the horses snorting and wild-eyed from the smoke. Behind them, Zachary spots the move through a gap in the smoke and howls a sound more animal than human. He spurs his bay horse into a hard run, 3 loyal gunmen following close behind. The rest of his men hang back, spooked by the sheriff's presence and unwilling to commit murder in front of so many armed citizens. Halfway down the rocky slope to the river, disaster strikes. The wagon wheel hits a buried stone, half the size of a man's head, a piece of granite hidden beneath a thin layer of dirt. The already weakened axle, cracked from the earlier impact, snaps, with a splintering crack that echoes like a gunshot. The wagon jerks violently to the right, throwing Martha against the wooden rails hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs and nearly pitching Peter into the brush. One of the draft horses goes down, screaming, its front leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The wagon is finished, a broken wreck blocking the trail. They scramble out, minds racing, hands moving on instinct. Lakota shoves the leather-bound ledger inside Emma's coat, jamming it against her ribs, and shouts at her to take Martha and Peter on foot toward a low stand of cottonwood trees by the water, maybe 200 yards away. If they can reach the trees, they can use the cover to pick off anyone who follows. "What about you?" Emma demands, already pulling Martha upright. "I slow them down," Lakota says. "Go. Now. You are already wounded. Go!" He roars, and the force of it propels her into motion. He stays behind with the wrecked wagon, using it as cover, his rifle braced on the tilted bed. He shoots just enough to make Zachary and his men dismount and take cover, buying Emma and the others time to run. His wounded arm trembles. Sweat stings his eyes. Crimson seeps through the bandage Emma tied hours ago. He can feel his strength draining with every heartbeat, a slow leak he cannot stop, but he does not move. Not yet. Emma half carries Martha toward the cottonwoods, the old woman stumbling on the uneven ground, her burned shoulder a constant agony. Peter trots beside them, one hand clutching his wooden toy horse, the other gripping his mother's skirt. They are halfway to the trees when Zachary, who circled wide on foot while his men kept Lakota pinned, bursts from behind a cluster of boulders and charges straight for them. Before Emma can raise her rifle, he grabs Peter and hauls the boy against his chest. In one violent motion, his revolver jammed against the child's temple. Peter freezes eyes huge and brimming with tears he refuses to shed. Zachary's face is slick with sweat, his eyes wild, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Drop your gun, Emma," he screams, voice cracking. "All of you drop your guns, or I blow his brains across the sand." Lakota can see the standoff from the broken wagon 70 yards away. He cannot risk a clean shot. His right arm is failing, his vision blurring at the edges from loss of vital fluid, and Peter's small head blocks most of Zachary's chest. Even if he could make the shot, the risk of hitting the boy is too high. Emma slowly lowers her rifle, fury and terror locking her features into a mask of controlled rage. "Zach, listen to me," she says, forcing her voice to stay calm. "You shoot that boy, Pratt will still hang. The ledger is already out of your hands. There will be nothing left to bargain with. You will just be a man who murdered his own nephew for nothing." Zachary laughs high and cracked a sound that holds no humor. "You think I am walking into any court? You think they will let me testify against Pratt and Liv Pratt? Has got people everywhere, in the land office, in the territorial government, probably in the judge's own pocket. We ride south, me and the boy take the border trail into Wyoming, start over somewhere that does not know the Kruger name. You want him back? You burn that ledger right here, right now, where I can see it." He begins edging backward with Peter as a shield, using the boy's body to block any line of fire, moving toward where his horse waits, ground-tied behind the rocks. Martha staggers a step forward, one hand pressed to her burned shoulder, the other hidden beneath her shawl. Her face is pale, her voice hoarse, but her eyes are sharp with a clarity born of desperation. "You coward," she rasps. "You were born in this dirt, and you are still afraid of it. Your father built this land with his hands, and you are selling it for a banker's scraps. Heinrich would be ashamed." She pulls a small pocket pistol from beneath her shawl, a single-shot Derringer with a mother-of-pearl handle, a holdout weapon Heinrich gave her years ago for protection when he traveled to town. Lakota never knew she had it. Emma never knew she kept it loaded. Zachary flinches, his attention splitting for just a heartbeat, his grip on Peter shifting as he tries to angle his body to see both Martha and Emma at once. In that instant, Lakota moves. He sprints downhill, ignoring the pain screaming in his wounded arm and the fire burning in his ribs where an earlier bullet grazed him. He closes the distance in seconds, a blur of buckskin and fury, and tackles both Zachary and Peter from the side. The three of them hit the sand in a tangle of limbs, Zachary's revolver discharging with a deafening crack. The bullet sears along Lakota's ribs, a line of fire that steals his breath and opens a fresh wound, but he does not let go. Emma dives for Peter, her hands locking around the boy's arm, and drags him clear with strength born of pure terror. Peter gasps and sobs, but he is alive unmarked, except for the bruises that will bloom tomorrow. Martha, hands shaking so hard she can barely aim, fires her tiny Derringer into the dirt, 6 inches from Zachary's face. The crack and spray of sand shock him just long enough for Lakota, gasping half-blind with pain, feeling the darkness creeping at the edges of his vision, to wrench the revolver from Zachary's hand and slam the butt into his jaw with all the strength he has left. Bone crunches. Zachary's head snaps back and he goes limp, crimson pouring from his broken mouth. Odakota rolls onto his back, breathing in ragged, desperate pulls, his life seeping from 2 wounds, now his vision graying at the edges. He can hear Emma calling his name, can feel her hands pressing something against his side. But the world is fading, sounds growing distant and muffled. "Stay with me," Emma is saying, her voice breaking. "Do you hear me? Stay with me. We are not finished yet." He tries to answer, but the words will not come. Darkness closes in. Up on the ridge, Sheriff Harlan and the townsfolk finally thunder down the slope, weapons drawn too late to stop the violence, but in time to see the aftermath. Cornelius Pratt, who followed the posse at a safer distance, mounted on a fine roan mare and dressed in a wool suit despite the heat, sees Zachary on the ground, and the ledger still clutched in Emma's coat. His face drains of color. He yanks his horse around to flee, but Honest Abe blocks his way, rifle leveled at the banker's soft chest. "You have written enough folks off your books, Pratt," Abe says, his voice steady and cold. "Time you answered for the numbers, and for Heinrich Kruger's murder." Pratt's eyes widen. "I did not, you cannot prove. Martha Kruger says different," Abe replies. "And I believe her more than I believe you." Pratt surrenders not out of remorse, but because he is outnumbered and outgunned, and because he is at his core a coward who deals in ink and intimidation, not bullets. Dr. Nathaniel binds Odakota's wounds right there beside the river, working in focused silence, while the water flows past and the sun beats down on them all. He cleans the bullet graze along Odakota's ribs and the hole through his upper arm with whiskey that burns like liquid fire, then stitches both wounds closed with neat, careful strokes. Emma kneels opposite him, holding pressure where Nathaniel directs her skirt soaked with Odakota's vital fluid, her hands steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. "He has lost a lot," Nathaniel says quietly. "He needs rest, clean water, and no more bullets for at least a month." "He will have all 3, Emma says, her voice firm. "I will make sure of it." Odakota drifts in and out of consciousness, the pain a constant throb that keeps pulling him under. Once, when his eyes flutter open, he sees Emma's face above him, lined with worry and exhaustion, and he manages a weak smile. "Still here," he murmurs. "Still here." She echoes, and her hand closes around his warm and solid and real. Martha drained and shaking hands, the ledger directly to Sheriff Harlan. Her voice is weak but clear. "You want that badge to mean anything?" She says, "You walk this book to the judge yourself, and you stand there while I testify to every line I wrote. If you do not, I will tell everyone in this territory that you helped Cornelius Pratt steal their land while you looked the other way, and I will name him as the man who murdered my husband." Harlan looks down at the crimson on the sand, at the fear still etched on Peter's face, at the circle of townsfolk who have lost homes and friends to Pratt's errors. Some of them are watching him with expressions that promise consequences if he makes the wrong choice. For once, fear of losing his own position outweighs fear of crossing a rich man. He nods, holding the ledger with both hands as if it might explode. "This goes to Judge Calloway," he says loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I will testify to what I saw here today." Zachary, jaw broken and mouth full of crimson, is tied to the wheel of a borrowed wagon. He cannot speak, can barely see through the swelling. But his eyes follow Emma with a hatred that will never fade. Pratt is thrown in shackles into the back of another wagon, his fine suit covered in dust, his face slack with disbelief. He keeps muttering that there has been a misunderstanding, that he can explain everything, but no one listens. The group moves toward Gunpowder Gulch at a slower, steadier pace, the urgency replaced by grim determination. Odakota lies on a stretcher slung between 2 horses drifting in and out of consciousness, his face gray beneath the tan. Emma walks beside him, one hand resting on the stretcher's frame, adjusting the blanket when the wheel ruts jolt too hard. When he stirs and his eyes open unfocused and confused, she leans close and murmurs, "We made it. Peter is safe. Rest now." His fingers twitch toward hers, and she takes his hand for a moment, squeezing gently before letting go. It is not a declaration, not a promise, just a moment of shared relief that they are both still breathing. 4 weeks later, under a hot August sun that bakes the wooden buildings of Gunpowder Gulch and turns the main street into a river of dust, the circuit judge holds court in the largest space available. The open yard behind the courthouse, with benches dragged out from the church and planks laid across barrels for additional seating. Half the territory seems to have crowded in to watch, standing in the shade of buildings or sitting on wagon beds, fanning themselves with hats and folded newspapers. Judge Calloway is a lean man in his 60s, with a face like a hatchet and a reputation for fairness that has survived 3 decades on the frontier. He reads the ledger aloud, page by page, his voice flat and relentless. Martha testifies, first standing in front of the crowd in a plain dress with her burned shoulder still bandaged beneath the fabric. She owns her part in writing false signatures, explaining in a firm, clear voice how Pratt threatened her family, how he stood over her while she worked, how he promised the changes were legal necessities and not theft. "And I believe," she says, her voice ringing clear across the yard, "that Cornelius Pratt murdered my husband Heinrich to seize control of White Willow Spring and silence the one man who knew his schemes. I have evidence, a confession I wrote 6 years ago and hid in the ledger, fearing for my life if I spoke." The crowd erupts in murmurs. Judge Calloway bangs his gavel for silence and examines the hidden page Martha describes. He reads it aloud, and the murmurs turn to angry shouts. Pratt, sitting in shackles at the defendant's table, goes pale as death. Emma testifies next, describing the boiling water, the attack, the chase, and the siege. She speaks without hesitation, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving the judge's face. When the defense lawyer tries to suggest she is exaggerating to protect her family, she meets his gaze and says, "My son had a gun to his head. I watched a Lakota warrior nearly bleed to death saving him. I do not need to exaggerate." Several Lakota elders testify through Odakota, who translates despite the pain, still pulling at his wounds. He stands beside the witness bench, one arm in a sling, his face thinner than it was a month ago, but his voice strong. They describe how fences crept toward White Willow Spring after each new loan came due, how their hunters were turned away by armed men claiming legal right, how promises made in good faith were broken on paper they could not read. The crowd listens in silence. Some faces show shock, others show recognition. More than a few show guilt. The final surprise comes when Judge Calloway reaches the back of the ledger, hidden in the binding sewn in with fine thread that had to be cut away with a knife. Are pages Martha had copied before Pratt could alter them, a record of the original agreement she made when she still believed the work was honest. Among them is the first shared rights agreement for White Willow Spring, dated April 1848, with Heinrich Kruger's genuine shaky signature, and the red thumbprint of Matonajin Odakota's father pressed carefully beside the Lakota name written in Martha's script. Those pages match the land parcels now in Pratt's possession too perfectly to be coincidence. The judge holds them up for the crowd to see, and a murmur runs through the assembly like wind through dry grass. Judge Calloway declares Pratt's deeds void and orders White Willow Spring returned to common use to be governed by a small council of 4 settlers chosen by the local homesteaders and 2 Lakota chosen by the White Willow Band. He sentences Cornelius Pratt to 15 years in the territorial prison for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder, with a recommendation that territorial authorities investigate Heinrich Kruger's death as a probable homicide. Zachary Kruger, his jaw wired shut and his future destroyed, is given 8 years for assault, attempted kidnapping, and aiding in fraud, with no chance to hold land or work in any position of trust again. The gavel falls. It is not justice that repairs all wounds, but it is a beginning. Some settlers grumble about Indians on councils and government meddling. Some Lakota resent any paper solution at all, seeing it as another white trick dressed in new words. But the water at White Willow begins to run under a new rule that for the first time in years includes both sides by design rather than accident or conquest. Emma and Lakota serve on that council. It is practical work, hard and often frustrating, riding the boundaries to check for fence breaks, measuring water flow during dry spells, arbitrating disputes over grazing times, and irrigation ditches, sitting through long meetings where old grudges simmer beneath every discussion. But it is work that matters, and it binds them tighter than any spoken vow ever could. They do not marry. The distances between their worlds are too great for that kind of declaration in 1852. The weight of history and prejudice too heavy. But they build something quieter and more resilient, a partnership built on shared work and mutual respect, on knowing the person beside you will hold the line when trouble comes. Sometimes Emma brings Peter to the spring, when she and Lakota ride out to inspect a new fence line. The boy is older now, more serious, but he still likes to throw stones into the shallow pools and watch the ripples spread. Lakota shows him how to follow fish shadows with his eyes before he casts a line, how to read the current to know where the trout hide. Peter listens with the grave attention of a child who has learned too young that life is fragile and adults are not invincible. On one cold evening in late September, when the aspens turn gold along the riverbank and the air smells of coming snow, Emma and Lakota walk the length of the spring to check a section of fence damaged by a fallen tree. Lakota tires sooner than he admits. The scar along his ribs still pulls when he walks too far, and his right arm aches in the cold. Emma notices without comment and falls into step just close enough that when he stumbles on loose rock, he can lean his weight into her shoulder for a few strides without turning it into an admission of weakness. "You could have left when this mess started," Emma says quietly, as they stop to watch the water slide over smooth stones worn soft by centuries of flow. "Taken your family north to the Powder River country, forgotten our names, let us fight our own battles." Lakota studies the spring his father once trusted strangers to share the water clear and cold, the banks green with new grass, where the fences have been pulled back. He remembers the day his father came home from that meeting with Heinrich Kruger, face alight with pride, telling the story of two men who chose peace over suspicion. He remembers his father's words. "Trust once given and honored is stronger than any fence. My father stood here with yours." Lakota says, his voice quiet but firm. "They made a promise by this water. Heinrich kept his word until Pratt killed him for it. We just finished what they started. Together." Emma is silent for a long moment. Then she reaches into her coat pocket and pulls out a small object wrapped in cloth. She unwraps it carefully, revealing a carved wooden horse. "Peter's toy, the one he clutched during the worst of the violence. Peter asked me to give this to you," she says. "He said you saved his life, and he wanted you to have something that mattered to him. I told him you might not want a child's toy, but he insisted." Lakota takes the horse, turning it over in his hands. It is crudely carved, the work of a settler's knife on a winter evening, but it is smooth from handling and warm from Emma's pocket. "Tell him I will keep it," he says. "And when he is older, I will teach him to carve a better one." Emma smiles a real smile that reaches her eyes for the first time in weeks. He would like that. She does not take his hand, too bold a gesture for two people who still live under the eyes of a cautious town, too complicated for two worlds that do not easily blend. But she stands close enough that their sleeves brush close enough that the steam of their breath mingles above the cold water, close enough that anyone watching would know they are more than council members doing a job. In the reflection shimmering between them on the water's surface, the spring runs clear and strong, carrying away the heat of a spilled kettle, the smoke of a burned barn, the ink that almost stole a river, and the lies that nearly destroyed 2 families. What remains is hard work, scarred bodies, a boy learning to fish, and a wary growing bond between a Lakota warrior and a stubborn frontier widow who learned under gunfire and rope burns that survival sometimes means choosing the same ground and refusing to leave it, no matter who tells you it cannot be done. Above them, the first stars appear in the deepening sky. The coyotes begin their evening song on the hills. The water flows as it always has, as it always will, shared now in truth, as it once was in promise, a promise made by 2 fathers who believed that honor could bridge the gap between strangers and kept by 2 people who proved them right. And for the first time in a long time, that is enough.